Welcome back to our growing experiment. We're here with Renee and Matt from Ferme Ojalammi. Do you guys want to tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Sure. So it's pronounced Ferme Ojalammi,
Okay.
which is totally common. So Ferme, so I'm Francophone, and Matt is Finnish heritage, which is the Ojalammi. So the J is pronounced as a Y.
But I won't speak any Finn because I don't know any.
Right. a nod to our roots, I guess. We moved here almost 5 years ago.
2017, 2018.
Yeah.
Right around Christmas.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We don't have any agricultural background. And so we were living in suburbia in Sudbury. And we bought a camp and thought that's kind of what we wanted to do, and realized that's not really what we wanted. In terms of just, kind of having our own little piece of the pie. And then we found this place probably at the right time, and we moved here. And so we've had a lot of questions from people who are looking to buy farming properties. And I think the process tends to be a little bit more complicated with farming properties than it is with just regular city real estate sometimes, because there are more factors at play. And so it's been, from day one, it has been a learning process, and we've done a lot of pivoting. We've, from the time that you think, hey, we're going to buy a farm and it's going to be awesome, and we're going to do all these things, and then you start and your plan changes about 150 times, and it will continue to change probably another 300 while we're here. But we've, finally, I think we finally feel like we've found our permanent home, and this is where we'll stay. And so
I think we when we moved here and we bought the place, there was no plan to like become farmers at all. I don't think. It was to homestead. It was that whole, let's get chickens and maybe a horse and have our dogs and just kind of homestead and maybe, keep working day jobs. But the big driver was the space. At least for me, it was like no neighbors, have the space, have some wood lot to play in, like get a tractor, plow snow, do fun stuff like that, and live the homestead life. But then that goes to chickens, then to horses. And then I think within about a year, we sort of were like, okay, this is the place we want to be. We definitely were okay with the distance from town, and that's manageable. This is where we want to be. Now we shifted to like, how can we make some money off of this land that we have? We have all this property. How can we make some money and maybe eventually not have to leave here and be able to make enough money to be able to stick around here and not have to drive into town? And it kind of shifted to that focus. And then from there, then it just took off. Then it was, okay, what about this? What about that?
yeah, Matt went down the YouTube rabbit hole.
Yeah, right. Started with like homesteading, realized you're not going to make a living selling chicken eggs. And then it just turned into, okay, what are other people doing? What if you put a greenhouse up? And then you discover JM Fortsy and all the urban, the market gardening scene, and kind of discovered that and started learning about that. And one thing led to another, bought a greenhouse, and it just kind of snowballed from there. Initially, it wasn't necessarily let's buy 10 acres or whatever and become permanent farmers. That wasn't the motivation necessarily.
Not that we're permanent farmers now.
Yeah.
But
right.
Yeah.
So you kind of added, you kind of added like a little bit each time you kind of found you could take on a little bit more, or you wanted to have another avenue.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I think so. We both work full time. And so in some ways what happened was March 2020, I was a month into a maternity leave, and then COVID, like you could see COVID coming, right?
Yeah.
And so we had we'd really talked about, you know, starting a bit of just ramping up a little bit. And then just, you know, as shutdowns were looming, we made the decision to buy these 2 rather large greenhouses, not really understanding how they were going to go up, the contractor shortage, the labor shortage, all
Yeah, it was
that
right around the
stuff,
time when
right?
like the supplier, it turned into, you start making phone calls and you realize your greenhouse supplier that you were, we'll probably order them. We realized very quickly, like, order them now or you may not get them at all. And it turned into like, holy smokes, like all this stuff that we were kind of deliberating over maybe purchasing and tackling in, what was it, 2019, turned into like do it or forget about it,
Yeah.
because things are getting bad and supplies are getting limited and suppliers are starting to freak out. Lumber prices were starting to go up. So it was just like kind of now or never sort of thing. And we just opted for the go for it.
Yeah, we had that Fisher cut date, or just that moment, right? Like, I think it really propelled us into a lot of our lofty dreams. And then all of a sudden we were like, okay, so we're doing this and we'll see if you can make a go of it. But you kind of realize that in Northern Ontario, you have to do things a little bit differently. Yeah. And sometimes you watch a lot of stuff on YouTube, but people are in like Arizona.
Yeah.
Or they're in Oregon or, whatever.
Yeah.
And
Colorado.
Yeah. And you're like, oh my God, I want to do that. But we don't have the same climate. So is that actually going to work? And so we ended up, Matt ended up finding, and I don't know if you're familiar with them, but it's Spring Hill Farms, which is in Trout Creek.
Okay.
And so we thought, these guys are amazing because they're basically doing what we've ended up doing.
Yeah, we copied them. We pretty much copied them.
But they're about an hour away from us.
Right. Yeah, I actually bought some equipment from them and picked their brains a fair bit. They're all over YouTube and very much like, here's how we do stuff. Very educational.
Yeah.
That's
stuff.
super helpful.
Yeah, and
you're starting something new.
Yeah, and that's basically
you're picking up the phone and like, hey, we've run into this issue. What do you do?
Yeah.
And they were very, very helpful. Unfortunately, Wayne, who was an integral part of that operation, ended up passing. And so we were, and you kind of sometimes you take for granted when people are helping you out and how integral they are to your own operation, because we could just call and he would answer anything. He was amazing. And so his partner has since sold the farm, and now we're like, okay, so you're really figuring things out for yourself, which is good and bad. So now that's been about a year. But even with all of that, you kind of realize that when the stuff you see on YouTube, the information that people give you, it's not always, sometimes I think people sugarcoat a lot of stuff, and especially when you live in Northern Ontario. And I saw your post about the seedlings basically being at a bit of a standstill.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, because so we have a hydroponic operation. Mm-hmm. And this time of year, you're like, grow.
Yes.
Please just grow.
Any little bit of sun, you're like, yes.
Yeah.
Like 2 days ago, we got sun all afternoon, and you're like, you can almost hear the lettuce growing.
Yeah.
And then as soon as the sun drops below the horizon, it's just like done.
Yeah. And it makes you realize, just from from a self-reliance point of view, how initially you get into this stuff and you think, okay, we're just we'll have a shelter and it will be great. And then you realize, yeah, okay, so we're going to need to add heat. We're going to need heat because this just won't be enough. And then you realize, all right, so we should probably add lights because now we don't have enough lights because nothing's growing. And if you want to make a go of it, stuff has to grow. And then in our case, we don't have enough power. We don't have enough hydro. And so now we're really fortunate that one of our customers is really big into solar and has recently started his own company. And so he's set us up really well. So we're in the process of installing panels and this really cool battery pack. But it's just not as easy as sometimes you think like, oh, we're going to do this. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Saw it on YouTube. Oh, people do it all the time. And then all of a sudden you're putting in the work and you're realizing that this is a lot of work, or, you're not, and, from our point of view, I mean, it's a lot of work, and we have kids. And so they're busy, we're busy, we have full-time jobs, those are busy. And so, but I don't know, kind of take a step back and you realize that this isn't like, it's not a 1 year project, right? Like wherever you're trying to really establish your roots, it's not like make or break within a year. You have to look at it as you have to take a step back and you really have to think like, okay, what's our 5-year plan? What's our 10-year plan? So that you're not trying to do everything the same year, and you're not trying to achieve everything and succeed at everything within the first year, because you learn so much. You have crop failures,
well, we knew little or almost nothing. Like we knew that, and so our strategy coming in was to stay working. Both of us keep working, do what we could while still both working full time. So we had kind of heard from enough people and seen enough, just knew enough, I guess, and were cautious enough to not quit both of our jobs and think that we're going to plant some seeds and be able to grow crops and learn how to harvest and post-harvest and sell and build a market and build a clientele and all that stuff in one season and rely on all that income. And so we've been able to afford to learn the hard way through all those things. And so it's been stressful, and because there's still a lot of money being poured into all this. But at least at the end of the day, we go to bed and we have a job. We're still going to work the next day. So there's still some money coming in, and that takes some of the pressure off.
Yeah.
I guess.
But I think some of that is due to the fact that we have 2 4,500 square foot greenhouses. Okay. So they're 30 by 150. So we have 2 of them. And so building them, when you don't realize, I think like when you commit to buying something and you're like, oh yeah, 30 by 150, that seems like a good size. But you don't realize the logistics behind a lot of the stuff that you commit to doing. It's like, the term greedy January eyes, where you're going through seed catalogs and you're like, I'm going to grow this, and I'm going to grow this, and this is going to be great, and I want this. And so you buy everything. And then come spring, when you're trying to plant everything, or you've got all these seedlings and you're like, all right, so these all need to get into the ground at some point, and I'm not really sure where this is all going anymore.
Because because we are dabbling in both. Like we're very interested in market gardening as well, not just hydroponic lettuce. So we have our second greenhouse. The intent was that would be probably tomatoes and or peppers, and then row crops that needed the extra heat. And then also outside, we've got a fairly sizable garden that we just built this year. So didn't really do too much for us this year, but it was kind of like build the beds and get get the soil going and
Yeah.
kind of get ourselves organized so that this coming year we've got beds to plant in. So we're doing that as well. The lettuce we thought we were hoping would be like greenhouse one is like set up, running, making us some money to help help us afford to buy the seeds and the other stuff we need for all the other stuff as well. So that we're not all in one, our eggs aren't all in one basket.
Yeah.
Plus we have interests in both, right? I mean, hydroponic is cool, but by the same token, it's kind of boring just in the sense that it's very repetitious. Once the system's running, it's just running, and it'd be like growing one or a few crops in garden beds over and over and over. Whereas with the garden beds, you can kind of play around and you're alternating them and playing with different stuff, and there's different challenges. So
The Matt and I think very differently. And so he thinks very much in the moment. And I think 3 to 4 weeks away. And so we often I'll be like, oh, we should do all these things. And he's like, when are we doing all these things? I'm like, I don't know, but we're going to do all these things, And so I kind of set off and I plan ahead, and I'm like, look, I have a plan. It's going to be great. And then we get into situations where in the greenhouse, I'll say stuff like, we have shade cloth, you need to take the shade cloth down. Because if you don't take the shade cloth down, now, the light is the days are getting shorter, we don't have enough light. And so he's like, yeah, but I have these tasks to do, which is fair enough. And so the shade cloth will stay on for too long, and then you start to see the issue in the growth, right? So you're kind of learning how much light has an impact on your plants. But when you have so much to do, you tend to put stuff off because it's not an issue right then and there. Yeah. And that's like in farming, that's a big part of the problem. Like, what happens today impacts your plants 3-4 weeks away. So not having enough light right now, you're like, okay, but the seed packet says that this should be ready in like 60 days. And now we're on day 65 and they're not even halfway grown.
Yeah.
What's going on?
I told you to take that shade cloth down, and
Yeah.
you're like, but you didn't tell me when and how to do it with all the other things too, right? Like there's that balance. It comes back.
Prioritizing everything must be challenging.
It's easy to, yeah, that's right. It's easy to plan, and this would be great, and this might make us more money, and let's try this as well. But all the other stuff, unless stuff's dropping off the other end, which it never does, it just squashes you down with less and less and less time. I'm sure you guys know what that's like.
Or you're learning. How long have you, it's the first year you have your dome?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
we built it this year. So
Yeah.
this is actually the first time we're growing in it. We got it built in October, and we decided, okay, we'll just throw stuff in there and see how we do for the winter. But it's there's not enough sun. Was
the plan to heat it and grow all winter? Is that?
Well, originally, so like it does seem to keep a fair amount of heat in there, just sort of from when the sun does heat it up. So like, say if we get a day where it's fairly cold outside, but we have like a good, clear, sunny day, like it's nothing for that to heat up by itself to like 25, 26 degrees.
Yeah, a couple days ago it was 27 in there.
Yeah.
So
And then
it
it'll stay like close to zero or like a little bit below zero. But like we just kind of wanted to see like how far we could push the dome, because they kind of advertised that it would have a pretty big buffer between the outside, and it does. Like the heat sink big tank does work, but it's just like you said, living up here where we live. And also too, I think that's like best case scenario. So like, because where our dome is in our backyard, we don't really get sun on it in the morning till probably about 9:30, 10 o'clock. And then when the sun starts to go down the other side, it goes behind the garage, and we're losing the sun at probably like 3 o'clock just in the shadow. So then really at best, you're getting how many hours of direct sunlight?
5 hours.
5, right? Yeah. So it's like a couple of things like that. Like you said, like where we kind of, we had the romantic idea in the beginning and sort of jumped into it, and they're like, oh, okay, there's some real limitations because of where the dome is and what the climate's going to be like and what the weather's going to be like. And so like that's what we did. We just got a heater that we're going to put in there. That's the first step, and likely we'll probably end up putting a light in there if we're going to try to grow across the winter like we were trying to do this year.
Yeah.
But what we might end up doing too is like say start stuff early for like spring kind of thing, and then just try to have like an early season kind of harvest when there's a little more light, and then do say the summer stuff. We'll do like say tomatoes and peppers in there, and then we'll do like a later fall kind of thing, and then we'll have probably a couple months out of the year where nothing will be in there.
Yeah.
So then that way we can just maximize just the regular sun instead of putting a light in there. Like if we can do that, that's again the dream. So we're tinkering too.
Oh yeah. All right. Do you have just curious, do you have like a thermometer, like an Inkbird or something that's keeping tabs on like what your temperature is doing?
So I check it every morning, but we haven't been really logging it throughout the night. My logic has basically been that it's not going to get any warmer when I get up in the morning, because I get up at like 4:30 in the morning. So it's not like there's any sunlight or anything, right?
Yeah.
So I figure it's basically as cold as it's going to get, or it might get a little colder between the time that I do work and my wife gets up.
What did we say? It was about like 5 or 6 in the morning.
Right before sunup,
tends
we
to be
found.
the
Yeah,
coldest
last winter
period.
we had the Inkbird, which is just like a little Amazon.
It's like, what is it?
probe
It's like a $40 unit, I think. And
Yeah,
so
Inkbird makes like temperature controllers and to kick heaters and cool and fans and stuff on based on temperature.
but it's Bluetooth. And
Okay.
so
every
it's-
day I'd go in and I'd download the last 24 hours temperature graph and just see. And yeah, I was last winter just to kind of get a handle on how our heaters were working and how cold it was getting. And it seemed to be like right before sunup, it was like the coldest, and sometimes even just after sunup. It was like like just tanking. The temperature would just tank, and then right as the sun comes up, it's like a boing in a greenhouse. As soon as you get any light on it, it just skyrockets. But
but we heat our greenhouse with 2 propane heaters. They're like ceiling mounted propane heaters, and it's very expensive. And so we've been talking to people, and they're like, oh, you guys should have like, is there a way, could you have like some kind of like water heater system, or like could you have like barrels of water? Like, I wonder how we would do that. And they were like, it's a hydroponic system. Why don't we just heat the water because you can heat the water to, I think like the plants will tolerate like 25 to 30 degrees.
Right.
But then we get into power issues, right? Again. And so we've just bought it's called an inline heater. And then so you connect it to your tank or to your pipes, and then it heats the water going out. So as the water kind of is dispersed throughout the channels, well, then the heat will come out at the same time, which will help to heat the greenhouse.
And we knew that, and the only way that's feasible is with the solar. So we won't even dare hook that up until we have our solar system, because we just can't afford the hydro to run like probably a 15 amp heater that's probably going to want to run all the time, especially as it gets colder.
Yeah.
But
well,
you want to see like
you say afford the hydro, like afford like unplugging stuff, right? And so we're at the point where because they're called UFO lights, they're grow lights. If you want to run anything within the greenhouse, you have to unplug stuff, because otherwise everything starts to flicker or stuff starts to shut down. We don't have any more hydro capacity.
We just borrowed 40 amps from the garage. That's all we could afford to borrow. So we got 40 amps to run whatever we want out there. But that goes quick. Our lights take up about, we have 12 of them, and they're 1.5 amps a piece when they're running. So there's half our power right there. And then there's the pump and some fans and our grow table, like our seedling table. So it all adds up really quick. And then when our heaters kick on, they're another fan a piece. So we're at the point where if I forget and I plug something else in, like a power tool or something, our grow lights will start flickering or something, a breaker will blow or something. Like we're that maxed out in there right now. So,
which isn't something you realize when you're first doing this stuff, because again, you have this romantic view of how things are going to go. And then you start dealing with stuff as it comes up, which is fine. It just kind of really puts it into perspective that it's just, it doesn't all happen year one. But the benefit to that though is that you'll probably change your mind about how you want to do things a lot, how you want to set things up, what you want to grow, how often, what your turnaround time is. And so we've done stuff like now, initially we set up the greenhouse the way that Wayne had his greenhouse set up, because
We didn't know any better.
that's kind of tunnel vision there. And now we're kind of in the process of, we've just planted, so we've talked a lot about planting the strawberries and having a secondary crop in the greenhouse throughout the winter months, because lettuce is just, it's very time consuming because you have to harvest it. We rinse everything because we have aphids. And so we just kind of wanted to have a secondary crop. And so now you kind of realize, okay, we don't only have to grow lettuce throughout the winter. You kind of have capacity to grow whatever you want, right? And just on that self-reliance piece, you just start to think, okay, so like we bought grow bags. And so there are these really great breathable grow bags that we trialed. So we used for tomatoes. So we grew tomatoes all last winter in our hydroponic greenhouse, because we were trialing different types of tomatoes. We wanted to see what grew really well and what didn't. And that was a really big learning curve. But it's the fact that you kind of realize, okay, so you don't necessarily need, and I mean, you know this just in the way that you've designed your beds in your dome, it doesn't have to be traditional rows, and so I think while in Northern Ontario, you have limitations, I think we have an opportunity to really think outside the box and do things a little bit differently. And so as you're doing stuff, some, you'll have a lot of successes, you'll have a lot of failures, but you learn from that stuff and you kind of go like, okay, so this didn't work in this configuration, but let's try it in a different way. And so you kind of keep plugging away and until you find a solution, or until you just decide to grow something else.
Yeah. Well, like you said too, when you try to learn about a lot of this stuff, a lot of people that are trying to do stuff similar to growing their own food and that kind of thing, you have to face the limitations of here. So I mean, in a way you got the challenges and stuff, and you're right, you got to be willing to fail. But I kind of tend to look at it a little bit romantically, where it's like, we're kind of trying to do something that really no one's done before. So it's like, yeah, we're going to mess it up, but it's like, I think everybody messes something up when they're doing something that's totally new. We're essentially exploring, like we didn't say oh, we know for sure we're going to be able to be self-reliant or anything. We said, that's why we like using the word experiment. We're like, let's see what we can do. Like you can listen to people who say, oh, well, that can't be done here. And to me, I always hear that and I'm like, oh, well, let's see.
Yeah.
Like I might not be able to do it the way everyone else does what they do, but I can probably figure out a way to make something work for me.
Right. Love it.
Yeah.
Because there's so many people who will say like, you can't do that. You can't. So last year it was, tomatoes won't grow in the winter.
Yeah.
It's like, challenge accepted.
Watch me.
And they did, and people loved them. Right?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, you grew these, you're growing these now? Yes, we are. And they're growing slowly, but they taste awesome. And
well, and I tend to think it's not that it can't be done, it's that we haven't figured out the way to do it yet.
Yep.
And so I love the fact that there are a lot of families who are looking at getting into farming or in homesteading or self-reliance, and they're just taking on this challenge to do things differently and to
Yeah.
do it for themselves.
Mhm.
And I remember when we started talking about buying the farm, and my parents especially, but I think it was like parents and colleagues and people who think about farming in the traditional sense. And it's like, guys, it's so hard. You will be miserable. It's so hard. Why would you do that to your family? And we thought, again, like that whole romantic vision. And yeah, I mean, it's hard, but it's hard. And, and so with the pandemic, with 3 kids, with all that stuff, would we change that? Absolutely not. I think we're learning so much, and stuff is changing. Like, so we've just recently, there's a new program in Sudbury. It exists throughout Canada. But there's a program that's now in Sudbury called Loop Resource. So just Loop. And so every other week, except we tend to be going every week right now, we pick up food waste from the superstore. And it's a crazy amount of food. And so we figure just from what they've said, like each pickup is probably about like $3,000, $4,000 worth of food, not for us, for livestock. And so we were actually the first pickup to go, and the employees there are so thrilled. They're so thrilled because all of this food used to go to the landfill. They would literally just fill bins and send it off. And that's now all of a sudden, all of that food waste. So as the farmer, you bring your trailer, you have to pick up absolutely everything that they give you. But it also makes you, when you're unpacking, you start looking at stuff and thinking, okay, what am I going to do with this? What can I do with, how can I reuse this packaging? Who's going to eat, or like, what do you do with flowers? Can you dry the flowers? How can you reuse them? What do you do with lemons? Who's going to eat the lemons? We're fortunate that we have several different types of animals here. And so they all eat kind of different things aside from the chickens that basically eat everything. And then the meat scraps go to our dogs and cats. But you start to look at things differently. We're fortunate because it saves us a lot of money just in terms of livestock feed. But they're thrilled. So they're learning about this whole recycling process for food waste. They're looking at things differently. They ask a ton of questions when we go. So it's neat because it's almost like you can almost see that cultural shift start, where people are just looking at what happens to food waste. Is the traditional grocery store system broken in that sense? Because when you see the amount of food coming out of there, you're like, somebody grew this and is literally just now it's not getting thrown out, but the systems are changing.
Yeah, I think that's so great. I grew up in a home where we did not waste food at all. So when I heard that you guys were doing that, I thought that was just amazing, because like, just to imagine all that food to just go to the landfill is insane.
Well, and recently I've been kind of thinking about, like, we're always hearing about how little resources we have and stuff. And I wonder sometimes in these situations where maybe we're misusing our resources, we're sort of having an overabundance in a way where we're not like putting it back in the system, right? Like that's sort of an output right there that could have been going back into a system for a long time. Like it makes perfect sense. Like when Sophia told me that that's what you guys were doing, I'm like, oh yeah, like why not give that food to animals who are going to be happy and healthy? Like it just totally makes sense, right? And it's great to hear that people are asking questions, because I think maybe there's more of a consciousness. It's like, well, where does my food come from? And if we're talking about like trying to save the environment and stuff, it's like, all right, does it make sense to say ship food all over the world when we have a beautiful country with tons of acreage that has probably good soil that could be used to grow food for people right here in the community. And
And
as
tons of people, yeah, and tons of people that would love to farm for a living if it was more
Yep.
feasible, right? And
yeah,
you can't look at it like, well, there's not enough farmers, there's not enough food production. We have the land.
Mhm.
We need to shift the demand and people's expectations.
Yep.
And more people like us will just gravitate towards, hey, if I could make a decent living doing this, I'd way rather do that than sit at a desk and work some 9 to 5.
Yep.
Right.
I
So I
think-
think that would happen. That would come, and the land is there. The people are here. There would be, I think there would be that shift.
Yep.
If there was more people saying, hey, I'll buy from you if you grow it. And then
Yeah.
all the little backyard growers within a few years are all buying land and saying, yeah, I can make a living doing this because everything I grow sells instantly. Like,
Except I think it's hard. The learning curve is hard. It's
Mhm.
it's long, and it's not right. Like, it's not everything you see on YouTube. It's
Yeah.
not everything that you read in a book. And so you really have to be willing to trial. You have to be willing to test different things, and you have to be willing to fail.
well, and we've seen that we live in a world where expectations are so high. Like, people are used to the supermarket, they're used to perfection. Anything with the slightest blemish doesn't get sold, right? And so, like, to come in and be a small scale backyard farmer and try to compete with these massive operations that can afford to throw out 30% of their stuff and only market the top 70 that is perfect. The bar is so high, the expectations are so high that when we go through our lettuce and there's the tiniest little blip on it, you might as well toss that leaf out because no one's going to want that, right? They're going to look at the bag and say, oh, there's a couple tip burn pieces in here, and they'll throw it aside and grab a different one. And it makes it, to me, that's a variable that makes this, it makes it right now tough to break into on a smaller scale.
Yeah, our rabbits and chickens don't complain.
No.
Like,
Yeah.
but I think people go to the grocery store and they're like, oh, this is so expensive. Groceries are just so expensive. Fair point. Except I think if people really understood the amount of time that it takes to grow things, the amount of resources and I think people would just have such a different perspective. Like, if everybody had to grow their own food, their perception of the cost of food would be vastly different, because it's not just something that takes a few minutes, or it's not just something, like carrots, right? So carrots are a very short crop, but not everything grows like a carrot. And the way that we've been, the way that we look at carrots, right? We're like, oh, well, this one's crooked, so this one should go to livestock. Like, it's a perfectly good carrot.
Yeah.
Like, if you eat it, it's perfectly good. But in a supermarket world, they throw it out. They don't want it because it's not perfect, because our view as consumers is that we've come to expect this perfection, and we've come to expect things to be cheap. But we're learning as we kind of go along that, if you're getting stuff from, if you're buying produce from specific countries, you're getting it at that price after transportation. So after it's been grown, after the transportation, after, realizing that even from a wage perspective, they're not paying people a living wage, or what would be deemed a living wage. And I think that if more people grew their own food, they would have a better appreciation for that. And why food costs are going up. Why are they going up during a pandemic? Because there are labor shortages. Because people have to pay more for labor now than they've ever had, which is impacting the price of food. And that's why some of the food just isn't even making it up here anymore, because it would just be so expensive that it wouldn't sell. So in some ways, I mean, it's kind of shifting expectations, but I don't know that people are there yet. And so do I think that everybody's just going to start growing their own food? I think there are more people growing their own food. I don't know that people are going to be ready and willing to put in all the effort to do that,
Yeah, and
but it's going to come at a cost.
I think that's right. Like, I think like the kind of idea I think we have in some way when we're reaching out to these different farms who are doing what you guys are doing, and like how you were mentioning, like, you know, you got to have realistic expectations about what you're doing, and other people want to, I think, hear like sort of, you know, oh yeah, we did get into it. We didn't really know anything at first. We kind of ran into these sort of hurdles and stuff like that. But like I said to Sophia, it's like we're going to reach out to people that are in our area. And I think in some sense, like when you see it on YouTube, there's some sort of a disconnect because this person is so far away. But like, you know, if we really wanted to, we could come see the farm, you know what I mean? And like, you know, it's like, oh, these are people just like me who are out there doing that thing that I have an interest in doing. And then if you're really interested, you start doing it. And like, I don't think, you know, you're going to see everyone go into it like you're saying, but I think like, you know, there is some kind of a hunger for that. And let's say, you know, you reach 1% of the people who hear that and they think, oh, well, you know what, maybe I'll give that a try. I didn't think it was doable, but these people are doing it. Because I think like, I think there's a kind of movement where people are becoming aware of it. I think as pressures get put on like supply chain lines and stuff, I think it's going to be more apparent. I think people will start to see where the rubber hits the road and see, you know, oh, well, you know, we can't get this food because it costs this much or costs that much. You know, if I grow it myself, what does it cost me to grow it? You know, what kind of money do I want to invest and what kind of time do I want to invest? And, you know.
Yeah. And I think I really like your system because I feel like for a lot of people, I think that's probably what they need. And a lot of, and I don't know if it was Jam Ford say it, but you get the sense of like, I need to buy all this land, right? If you're going to have a farm, you need to have a big farm. You need to have all the land. But realistically, you don't. It needs to be as big as you need it to be, or as big as you have the capacity to make it. And so I think so many people just get caught up in this, I need to plant like 10 acres worth of stuff. And then they realize what that actually means, the work that is involved with that, and how much waste comes from that, because you know, you need to start small. And are you doing it just for yourself? Are you doing it for yourself and 10 friends, 30 friends? Like how many, it's really, it's a really good feeling to know if you're putting food on your community's table. But is that what you want to do? Because if it's even just from like a self-reliance point of view, when you start looking at how much you are spending in grocery bills on a monthly basis, and what you can grow for yourself, what you can, you know, have in your pantry, or whether you're into like preserves or whatever the case may be, you know, starting to realize like, so as today, right? So you're starting to see more and more restrictions coming about. And so you're like, okay, so if you are growing your own stuff, you're more likely to have stuff in your basement all the time where you can go and pull that thing, carrots or whatever. I think from our area, a lot of the properties, it was crazy. The farm properties were just kept, there were like bidding wars on farm properties, because a lot of people just had this romantic view of farming, including one of the places just right behind us. And they grew what, last year? 2 years.
Firm?
Yeah. Right, like they're a legal cannabis operation.
Supposedly.
But they grew for 2 years and realized that the market wasn't what they were expecting. And then now it's like, okay, so they're trying to rent their farm.
Right.
But they're trying to rent their farm for a substantial amount. And then you just, like we start to look at stuff in a more realistic way now, because you kind of think, ugh, you can't, you're never going to generate that profit back from there. Where are you going to get your water? Where are you going to get this? How are you going to, and so I think like just from failures and from experience and from all that stuff, we're learning a lot more. And I think a lot of people who are buying these properties that are now way more expensive because of the pandemic are getting into farming, and they thinking that they're really going to change the way they do things, but I think it's going to be unaffordable for them.
Yeah.
From a big property point of view, right?
Yeah.
Like buy that 5-acre plot
Mhm.
and make something out of that,
You
because
much in 5 acres, right? Like
Yeah.
it's we all think like, oh, you need all this land, but start with 5.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Start with 1.
Oh yeah, our 1 horse paddock, and I was going to say earlier, the 30 by 150 greenhouse sizing. The funniest thing is that really we had no concept of how much work or how big that was or whatever, other than just Spring Hill. We knew what size they had and how much, lettuce and therefore revenue they were generating out of a greenhouse that size. And so we just kind of copied that model, figured out, okay, we could fit one that size and actually a little bit bigger in one of our horse paddocks, or paddocks that we were using for our horses, that's close to the house. So logistically it's decent walking distance, relatively flat ground. If we want to run water and power to it, it's close. So it kind of made sense, and that's what we could fit. But yeah, with those 2 greenhouses and the garden beds that we built to the side, I would say that's probably realistically, like, let's call it a 200 by 200 foot space. So whatever that is, like, I don't know, what is that?
I'm coming in mid conversation. I have no idea what you're talking
Let's just say whatever, it's not a big area. It's one of our multiple paddocks. And just that alone is more than we can handle in terms of just us. Like if we were growing all those garden beds that we built this year, if we had those growing like next year, the plan is to have them all planted and keep them all planted. But we already know how much work that's going to be, just those 30 foot beds. And then the 2 greenhouses, if they're both going full tilt, full pin, that's more than we can handle. And that's one fenced in area that's like 200 by 200 feet.
Yeah,
So this whole piece about buying, you buy 5 acres, unless you're going to do like tillage and tractor type stuff, you're doing that all by hand. That's way more than a couple could manage, I think.
Yeah.
You need a small army to manage that on a market garden scale if you're not doing big equipment and big tillage.
But even so, I mean, we bought our we have a little subcompact tractor that we bought from RL Equipment, and when we bought it, we were asking about different implements. It was still, and again, this is like 4 years ago, and so it was still big tractors, right? Oh no, we don't have that for subcompact tractors. But the market is changing so much that you have more people getting into, I don't know if you know what a BCS tractor is, but it's like a walk behind tractor.
Okay.
It almost looks like a large tiller. But more and more large farms are starting to downsize, and they're going with these subcompact tractors. And so as a result, because they're saving a bunch in fuel, because they're not farming the same way. They're not farming, like you still have your traditional farmers, but a lot of them are just starting to diversify their crops a lot more. And so they're not farming the same way, which means that they don't need the big combines. They don't need all the large farm equipment. And so last year, they RL called and they wanted to know whether or not we were interested in baling equipment for a subcompact tractor, which when we bought the tractor wasn't even an option.
I asked them if they sold them because we were interested in the time, because we have a couple acre field that we were growing hay on, and we were paying the neighbor to bale it for us, and said, hey, let's get ourselves a little baler and a little tedder rake and just kind of do it ourselves with our fancy little new tractor. And the stuff's available in like China and in the States maybe, but not here, not readily available. And so they said, no, there's no market for it. We don't sell that stuff. Lo and behold, a year and a half later, they're calling us saying, hey, we're thinking of bringing some of this equipment up. Would you guys still be interested? And we had moved on from that, and now we're into smaller scale stuff and not tractor-based farming stuff. So we passed on it, but interesting that there seems to be a bit of a shift even there. Getting away from more, I guess more people are getting away from, they're probably being in that industry, seeing that trend that there's more people. I think subcompacts and compact tractors sell a lot more than the big ones do now.
Yeah.
So they're realizing there's all these people out there with these machines, and now people are starting to like, hey, what else can I do with this thing? Right? What can I, what other attachments can I get to make this thing do more stuff for me?
A lot more people using hand tools than what's previously been done. And so they're not willing to go buy a $60,000 tractor and then still have to buy a whole bunch of different implements on top of that for small properties, because you'll never get that back. But it's large equipment to move around. And so now this up and coming market of subcompact tractors, you can literally put them on a utility trailer and bring them wherever you want.
Well, I think it's gotten to the point a lot of people run the numbers and realize real quick that unless you're massive, unless you have the biggest tractor available and the most land in it, more land than anybody else, it's so ultra competitive that unless you're just doing it like our neighbor here, who he's more or less just doing it to sustain his family. They're not doing it to become rich or anything. And even at that, they work very hard at it and they get by. And he's got all kinds of old equipment and lots of fields. But there's no room now for like the middle of the road 100-acre guy with a family with like one tractor and a couple attachments, and they can just make a living doing corn or wheat. You can't, like you'd go bust. So then it seems to be people are either going massive and buying up all the land and they have the biggest tractor in the world kind of thing, or you're going small and sort of like boutique or like, these smaller micro farm style where you're like really intense growing on less land to a smaller customer base who are willing to pay a bit more for it.
Or just for yourself.
Yeah, or then you get even smaller than that and you realize that on a quarter of an acre, you can grow more food than your family could ever eat kind of thing if you do it the right way.
Yeah, I find in a lot of the 5-acre groups, I find that there's a lot of, there are a lot of people who buy the 5-acre farm and then they're trying to make a go of it for themselves. And mostly in the US, but that question comes up all the time, like, how can I make more money? How can I make a go of this? And so a lot of people coming up with creative ways of maximizing their profitability on their land. So it's like, okay, so, you grow enough for yourself, but then if you can grow for yourself and then 5 neighbors, or even if it's a barter, and so maybe you grow vegetables and your neighbors have chickens. And so you end up bartering with them so that you're not overextending yourself.
Right. I saw one YouTube video where there was this family that was they had a partnership with their neighbor who they grew the feed, let's say it was corn. And the deal was that they would feed the pigs. They'd go halves on these pigs. I think it was pigs. They'd split the cost of the pigs. And then they both the one farm maintained them and the other farm grew the corn to feed them.
Right.
And collectively by the end of the season, they had split the cost, shared the work, and then they kind of basically just like both mutually benefited from all the pork, and whether it was just enough for them to eat or to sell, I can't remember, but it was just that kind of partnership. And they said it had been working well for them for years that way.
Yeah, it's good to see when you see communities, right? People helping each other out.
Yeah.
I think that's an important shift that we're starting to see.
Yeah.
And like with us too, like we're still learning, like the biggest thing that we were starting to learn this year was like, how do you preserve your food after you grow it? Because it's like, it's one thing when you're going out there and picking it off the vine, bringing it inside and eating it, but then you run into a problem when you have so much food and you seem like you don't have enough time to eat your food. And then you're trying to figure out like, what do I do with my food? Right. And so of course we learned this year that like we have to have like basically a time planned out where it's like, all right, we're gonna harvest this thing and then start preserving, or this thing we're gonna basically pick at because of the life cycle that we're gonna pick at it, and then we'll pull that out and plant something else in there, and then we'll preserve that thing or whatever. And then I think because we learned a lot there this year, we'll do a better job of managing the actual garden beds we have. And then we added another, I think it's 130 square feet or something like that with the dome. And then I built another small garden. And so now that we know proper spacing of our plants so that they're not suffocating each other or getting disease from each other, and now we know a little bit about preserving, I'm hoping this year we'll have some stuff to store away a little bit and hopefully be able to have, like, we have a fairly big family, so we'll have like the family over and feed everybody. And then like, I kind of like that too, where it's, you kind of have a little bit of pride. You're like, oh, here, have this this tomato pepper jam that I made. And someone's like, they have it on their cheese or whatever, and they think, oh, wow, that's really cool. Like, that's, I don't know, it's, you feel proud of it. Like, you almost kind of feel like a little kid because you're like, look at this thing I made.
Exactly. We had a friend come over and I said, here, like, try one of these tomatoes. And so she tried it and she said, this is like the best tomato I've had since I was in Rome. I was like, right?
Yeah, it's a good feeling for sure.
What else, like, what else do you need after that, right? You kind of get this satisfaction of, that's right, and I grew it and it tastes good and you like it, so that means it's actually good, you know. And
another thing I like about that too, sorry to cut you off, but like, it makes me think, so like the pride you have when you grow that thing and you have a lot of love for that food that you've grown, and people kind of say, like, you know, you are what you eat. And I mean, you can eat, like, I mean, you could probably say your tomato and another tomato might have, say, the same nutritional value, but maybe there's something to the fact that you grew it and the person who eats it knows you, and they're like, oh yeah, this is that tomato I got from my friend. Maybe there's something a little special for that. Like, it's just the idea that you're like, you feel good about eating the food, and maybe the food makes you feel better. You know what I mean? Like, it might be, it's in your head, but maybe that's something that's valuable, right? Like, if you feel good about what you're eating and where it comes from, I just feel like that would have a positive impact, right? And that's, again, I tend to be a little bit of a romantic around the idea, but I don't think that's something that is, it's something that I think there is an effect there. It's like, you know, it matters. Like, it really matters where you get it from.
I think part of that is why people are willing to, not all people, but some people are willing to drive or go out of their way to go to the Saturday food market or their local farmers market. Or it's not necessarily that everything they buy there is better than they could get at the grocery store, but they're going partly for that as well, right? They want to know that they're buying from someone who locally grew it. It just tastes better to them. Nutritionally, it's probably the same. You could probably buy bison meat from the grocery store that's probably every bit as good for you as the stuff you buy from the farmer's market. But knowing that farmer came down from New Liskeard and with a trailer full of freshly grown bison meat and you know, that kind of stuff, people just feel good about that. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I do find, like, it not because we grow it, but I find sometimes some of the food, not all, some of the food you can really taste the difference. And so I find tomatoes are one of those things.
Those carrots, they were just mind-blowing carrots this year. We've never grown carrots before, really, but they were crazy. And we're not either, I wouldn't say either one of us is like, you know, we just can't wait to sit down and eat carrots, you know, like, but they were just,
this is like end of the season carrots. And it's because of the cold that we were having. And so it would get cold at night and carrots get sweeter. Right. And so we've overwintered a bunch of carrots, which we did last year because we wanted to taste really sweet carrots that had been overwintered. And then when we went to dig them up, we realized that the mice had feasted on our
we fed the field mice for the winter.
So we're trying it again, mostly because we ran out of time. We ran out of time and we're like, where are we going to store like 1,000 carrots? Because they're in the ground. And so pulling them up isn't a big deal, but then it's where do you store them for the winter?
Wash them, store them.
Yeah. So, you have a couple of dinners or you're like, okay, well, I can I can pickle a few or something, but like,
Like you guys said, right, you have to, that post-harvest piece, it's
Yeah.
huge. It's
Yeah.
one thing to grow it, but then to be able to process it so that it doesn't go bad on you. It's a whole other world that I think you guys were saying you learned a lot, and I'm thinking this was year one, you had said. Like it'll probably take 10 years, right? Of like right from like seed planting, crop planting, right through to like having the last lid on the last jar in the pantry, and that's it, and you're good. And you know you've got just what you need with a little bit extra, like you've got it down to a science. That's probably a decade of learning and trial and erroring there to get to the stuff that you know you like and how much you need of it, and
well,
for
and
your
if
size of
you're,
family and
and like your fall planting.
Mhm.
So the right now, and so realizing that, you know, we're just coming up on the shortest day of the year.
Yeah.
And so how much more you actually have to plant, like if it's something that you know, you want to make sure that you're, if that's your source of food day in and day out, and that's what you're trying to do, you'll learn how much more you have to plant in, you know, end of September, October, in order to keep going throughout the winter months. And for us, I think we almost have to plant, I think it's almost 3 times the amount of lettuce in the winter months, like especially this time of year.
Yeah.
So that we have enough to keep supplying.
Right.
Right.
That's how much, you know, the
to fill
lack
the
of
orders,
light.
yeah, the commercial orders that we have.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
how much light will impact the plants.
Right. You have to
Keep
plant way
banana.
more because they're smaller yield.
Yeah, and it's just wild. We
They
learned
weigh
that.
less. And
It's
so
for-
everything's by weight.
Fortunately, last year, we only had about a third of our greenhouse filled, like actually actively growing hydroponically. And so then it was like this mad scramble in the fall as we realized that the growth was slowing down. We realized, oh my God, we need to plant more. Otherwise, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have harvested everything that's harvestable, and we're going to have all these little baby plants. So
But
we-
by the
yeah.
time you realize it, it's too late.
Oh, it was way too late. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's that whole like thinking weeks ahead and thinking the day up.
It's a good
Yeah.
system.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like it actually like
Yeah.
it works out really well for us because we're constantly like the conversations that we have. If we were both the same, we would get ourselves into a lot of trouble, because either we would make a lot of plans and, you know, draft them out and whatever, and
We'd have a lot of seeds on the table ready to go,
which we do
Right.
but
still.
we have nowhere to put them.
Yeah.
All right,
And-
so we're gonna have to wrap it up.
Yeah.
So do you want to tell everybody where they could reach you or get your products?
Sure. So we sell commercial lettuce, and people can buy it at Smith's Market in Sudbury.
Okay.
So we are at both Smith's LaSalle and Smith's Algonquin. And then we also have lettuce at Le Fromage in Verner. And so we have a few different varieties there, and same thing with the St. Charles Food Market in St. Charles. And sometimes we have it at Kate's Country Kitchen as well. Often people can buy it from the farm. However, right now we're having coyote issues, and so we don't really have people on the farm right now, which is you can hear the dogs barking their heads off because they're barking at coyotes outside.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we've been normally we have the dogs put away during the day when people might be stopping by to buy stuff. With the coyotes out and us losing chickens, we try to leave the dogs out more often, and so anyway, that's just kind of
The realities of farming that you don't think you're going to get into.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, for sure.
and then you do. So anyway, we have a Facebook page, we have an Instagram page, and we're usually pretty responsive on there. But yeah,
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. We had a really good
Thanks for
time
having
talking to
us.
you guys.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was great talking to you guys, and I feel like we could probably talk a whole bunch more.
Yeah, for
Probably.
sure.
So hopefully
the,
maybe
Yeah.
we can
yeah,
get back
the one
to
thing
it.
I do want to add is, and you're talking about the, you know, if you go to somebody else's farm, the one thing that we've realized from the small farms around here is that everyone is very, very helpful.
Mhm.
And so I'm sure that, and whether it's us or other farms that are nearby, I think that if you reach out to anyone in the farming community, anyone in the local farming community, they would be more than happy to help and to provide guidance and to show you around their place and answer any questions. I mean, we are as well. But I think that it's a very wonderful farming community out here.
Yeah, and the other thing we've learned is to not necessarily, don't be so hesitant to ask for help, even if people are, things like if you need a tractor for a weekend, or you just need some beds tilled, even, I don't know if, you might be into no-till, but I mean, just to get beds established, and you think, man, we could do this by hand, but if someone had a tractor and could do this for us in like an hour, there's probably someone in our little community that would be willing to throw their tractor on a trailer and put in a half day's work. We did it for a friend of ours this year.
Yeah.
We kind of traded electrical services for tractor services, and it worked out great, and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Just to kind
Good to
of
hear that everybody's kind of
Yeah.
helping each other out, and it's a
Yeah.
community, like you said, right? And
It's
Yeah.
a very supportive community. Yeah. So I mean, whenever, if ever, if there's anything, whether it's us or anyone else, just always reach out and people will help each other out.
I think we all mutually want to see each other's little thing
yeah,
do well, because
Yes.
it's only going to help the rest of us. It's definitely not a community where you're sort of like, this is my little market and I want to keep it to myself, because I think we've all realized real quick that you can't possibly grow enough food and supply enough locally grown food to saturate our market. It's just not even possible. We could all grow full pin, grow as much as you want, and you still could not saturate a community our size with you just couldn't. So I think everyone realizes that, and hey, if you guys do well, that really somehow or another helps us, and vice versa. So
We're glad you guys are around. If you ever need any help, don't be afraid to ask.
yeah, and I'm really anxious to see how things go with that dome.
yeah, we'll keep you posted
over
for
the
sure.
winter and into next year. Yeah, it'll be neat to see.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right, take care, guys.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.